Good evening. I'm your host, Don Burgess, and welcome to News, News, and Views. And with us tonight is Michael Dunkley, OBA MP and Shadow Minister for National Security and Health and Seniors. So welcome, Mr. Dunkley.
Hey, good evening, Don, and good evening to Bermuda. It's always great to have a chat with you.
It's always fun, especially with the daylight savings time, and we got a lot more sunshine at the moment.
Well, we still have the cold, but also still getting used to being dark at 7:15. I'm an early riser, so 7:15 is a little late for me.
Yeah, it is. It is a bit dark in the morning.
It will change quickly, though.
Yeah. Let's start with health issues, and we'll start with the hospital. You called the budget for that a scary mess. Why did you say that?
Well, to put it quite simply, is the PLP government has missed the mark the last couple of years in regards to the hospital budget. So let me give you some raw numbers here. In 21-22, the PLP was under budget for $27 million within the ministry. Some of that was COVID, some of that was a hospital. 11 million, just over 11 million was attributed to overspend or lack of budget supply at the hospital. Then in 22-23, the ministry was also $18.5 million. Some of that was COVID, but 15 million of that was the hospital. And the scary thing about that, Don, is that, we've heard a PLP MP say, we're the 30, we don't need the 6. But the 6 have warned the government over the past couple of years that the hospital budget would be deficient, and nothing has been done about it. And lo and behold, Don, we find out now that just before the budget is delivered, the health budget is delivered by the Honorable Minister in the House, the Minister makes the alarming announcement that $32 million of the hospital grant from the MRF has not been paid over the past 4 years. And I just put my hands on my head in shock and said, wait a second, 4 years later, we're saying that some of the grant hasn't been paid, totaled up 32 million over 4 years. So government has to meet 15 million of that, still, over $16 million short on that. And no one caught it. No one in the hospital realized the grant was short. No one in government realized that it wasn't paid. And the minister makes this shocking announcement. When you couple that with the fact that the budget has been short every year, and let me say very quickly here and strongly is the One Bermuda Alliance fully supports the hospital. It is our only hospital, as we all know, and I have 100% confidence in the services you get from the hospital. But if you have a government that fails to plan, fails to finance the hospital in the right way, and fails to understand and control the financial of the hospital, we're in deep trouble. And that's what's happened with the PLP. And let me take this a little further here. So you recall in about 2018, 2019, the government changed the funding of the hospital to a block grant from the Mutual Reinsurance Fund. And the block grant was about $322 million a year. That's part of that, the 32 million that was missing. So when the hospital went to that block grant in 322 million, I think that was a cardinal mistake by government, because what it did is it just assumed that's what your expenses are going to be. You have to work within that framework. You got to do the best you can. But what it did, it took the incentive away from the hospital to make extra revenue on procedures that they could charge for. And I think that's a cardinal error. Secondly, over this period of time, we've seen the hospital go from a relatively stable or healthy financial position in 2016, 2017. You'll recall that the financial position was so strong then that my colleague, the Deputy Premier and the Minister of Finance, when the hospital had $100 million of reserves set in one budget, that 25 million of the budget for the hospital the next year would have to come out of the reserves. 100 million was too much to have in reserves. Well, what have we seen since the PLP won the 2017 election? We see now where the minister announced during the budget debate that the hospital reserves, that 100 million, or that 75 million after they used 25 for a budget allocation, that is disappeared. it's gone. They've been living on cash reserves and an overdraft because this government has failed to plan in an appropriate way. Furthermore, and the last comment I'll make on this is, the hospital financial statements, annual reports have been repeatedly late. Now, I'm not saying anything about the way the reports are being prepared, but if a government cannot get timely and accurate reporting from an institution that we pump in millions of dollars to every year, how can you make decisions about the financial health of that entity? And with the hospital, we have to make sure it's in stable financial position so they can do what they have to do. But what this government is doing is, because of their negligence in the financial position, they are putting the Bermudian taxpayer in a more and more difficult position to fund the hospital, because at the end of the day, we will. But they've dropped the ball on this, and they've dropped the ball also on the national health plan.
Okay. So what would the OBA do differently then, instead of issuing a block grant?
Well, we never supported the block grant. It's something that we didn't do. We didn't do. The hospital should have two sources of revenue. The traditional source was always through premiums that were paid into, and part of that went to the hospital. Another source of revenue is got to be for goods and services that they offer. And one of the challenges I have right now, I also know that through COVID, the hospital was laser focused on making sure Bermuda was safe and as healthy as possible, and most of that was focused in on COVID-19. And so a lot of the elective procedures that they could have done at that time could not be taken, and that caused a serious backlog. But now that people are getting up and about and places are open for business, the hospital should be armed, in my words, to do those elective procedures and keep the money here in our system rather than people running overseas and getting them done. We've got operating theaters that are not being used because there are not enough nurses to staff them. But on the other hand, the minister says we're going to open up a health clinic in Mangrove Bay, which everyone will support because they want health services, but they're going to have nurses to staff that. We need to make sure the hospital can earn its keep and is supported by the government and the people of Bermuda, and the PLP's failed to do that.
Okay. Now, the PLP have also mentioned that medical tourism to try to attract people to come here to have procedures and things. What's the OBA's thoughts on that?
Well, I'm on record, and my colleagues supported that. Generally, we support medical tourism, but we need to make sure that in the footprint that we do it, we have a good plan on how it's done and what it's going to mean. We have significant challenges just ourselves with offering healthcare at affordable prices. And that's why the PLP said they want to implement the national health plan, is because they wanted universal health care and they wanted to have affordable prices for everyone across the board. But COVID gave them excuse why we didn't go anywhere on that. But PLP has been talking about this since 2010, and we're nowhere near then yet. So before the PLP run off and talk about medical tourism, because obviously we're going to have to partner with somebody to get it done, and obviously we're going to have facilities to do it, we need to make sure we take care of our own health challenges here at home. Look what the minister said herself about waiting times at the hospital, the amount of people that use in the emergency department, and the waiting times for people to get beds. We need to fix these things before we run off on another path and put resources into another bucket. So while we generally support it, we've got bigger issues right in front of our face that we need to deal with.
Yeah, I think it was like 3 hours and 59 minutes, if I'm remembering correctly, that the waiting times in the emergency room at one point.
And I get it, because what you have is twofold. Generally, I think that you have a crunch of issues facing us, like the national crisis in road safety, as the minister said, and hopefully we can get that later. We've got violence in our community. These type of things take up a lot of time in the emergency ward. And then we've got an older population that will need more attention and more health care. And also we've got uninsured people who are going to the emergency department a lot. Now, I've been down there with family, and I've seen the long wait times, not only for, to get a bed, but also to get operations. And we need to do better than that, because it's totally unacceptable. And if we don't fix it, the problem's just going to get worse. I think, people need to live in comfort and dignity. And the hospital's doing the best they can. I have no issue with the quality of care, even when I've been down there waiting for a long period of time. But when people go down there and they need medical attention, they shouldn't have to stay hours in a hallway where there's a lack of privacy and there are people running by to do their job and there's other patients coming in. It's not acceptable. We need to do better than that.
Now, I know the hospital was a public-private partnership to start with, a PPP, and we know the PLP have slammed. I don't want to say slammed, but have
No, you're
condemned.
correct. You're correct. It's their favorite subject.
Have slammed the airport. What are the differences between these two, and how the block grant may be hindering what the PPP was established for in the first place for the hospital?
Well, it's politics as far as I'm concerned. The PLP never supported the airport project, and they've made it political. They organize demonstrations and all that type of stuff. But when you take a look at it, we have a first-class airport down there that has won significant awards. The airlines love it, and it is a gateway for us to the world and a gateway for people coming to Bermuda, and it's operating well. The challenge that the PLP has is that they keep saying that all that money is leaving Bermuda, and they keep saying that through COVID, the airport cost Bermudians a lot of money. Well, the fact of the matter is, the airport's going to be closed through COVID, no matter who was running it. And if the government was running it, we would have been paying millions of dollars every month just to keep the staff on the payroll and to keep maintenance in the airport and things like that. But so it really bothers me to hear the conversations about the PLP rates about the airport, because I think they're playing for political folly. And I remember at the official opening of the airport, they were all smiles. So you can't stand up and criticize, but at the same time, cut a ribbon and smile and say how great it is. But let's get to the hospital, because that's where the hypocrisy comes in. They arranged a PPP with a company, Paget Health Services, I believe, to build and maintain the hospital for a period of time. I think most Bermudians are unaware, Don, that this year and in past years and until 2044, so for another 21 years, Bermuda, the taxpayer of Bermuda, will have to pay $42 million a year to PHS. $42 million a year, and it's broken down in three areas. One is for the building of the hospital, two for the contractual arrangements that go forward to maintain the building and stuff like that, and three, it's about $6 million a year for other contracts they have associated with it. So that hospital, at the end of the day, costs Bermudians over $1 billion. Taxpayers funding that, right? And look, I was the premier at the time and I opened the hospital. The acute care wing is a very magnificent building, but it is too small for our needs. It doesn't have enough beds in it, and it's not attached to the other hospital in an appropriate way. But it is what it is. It's there and it's operating well. I don't want to get into what I would have believed should have been done, because it's been built. So we have that. It's working quite well. It is a bit small, but it's costing us $42 million a year. Whereas in the airport is being funded by passengers who go through the airport on an ongoing basis. It's not a debt to the people of Bermuda. And so while the hospital has significant challenges in not only funding its operations because of the rising cost of healthcare and the inability for the government to monitor the finances in an appropriate way, we're also paying that $42 million a year out that's on taxpayers on the hook for. Yeah. Now, we need a hospital to run. So I'm all for making it efficient and quality of care.
Now, I know the PLP would disagree with you on that and saying that the airport is costing the Bermudian taxpayer money when there's passenger shortfall.
Of course, but I don't think even the PLP, who at times have that crystal ball that they like to look into, would have ever thought that we would have a pandemic that closed down the world. And I'm sure airports all over the world were faced with the same challenges, the ones that were privately run or the ones that were government government run. So, you know, the PLP can blame the OBA for having to pay ACON through COVID, but they can't blame the OBA for COVID. And if we had done it another way, we had borrowed 500 million, and I think that was the talk under the PLP, because they had looked into an airport back in 2010, 2011, maybe a little bit earlier, and the muted cost of it at that time was about 500 million. So if they had borrowed 500 million to build that airport, not only would we have been paying that debt down through COVID, but we'd pay to keep that, maintain that airport and keep those people on staff for when they opened up. So I think it's a weak argument. And I also think it's an argument that they're trying to take advantage of the taxpayer because they don't put all the facts out on the table. So they can talk about it all they want. The challenge with the PLP now is they want to blame the OBA when they've been the government since 2017. Now the record's there. They can't complain about what's going on because the record's there. And in the hospital, the last 2 years have been atrocious financially. Can you imagine, Don? Just put the shoes on the other foot and say that I was the Minister of Health and I sat down a week after the budget was read and said, oh, I'm regrettably upset that we've had to fund the hospital $32 million more because the grant was short over 32 million over the last 4 years. The PLP would have been all over that. They would have never let that one go. And they try to soft pedal it. You know, it's unacceptable because you're putting the health and safety of Bermudians and visitors at risk.
I want to ask you one more health question before we move on to national security, and that's with our aging population and our seniors. We know that the government statistical department predicts by 2026, I believe it is, that roughly almost 25% of our population will be a senior. What should be done to help our seniors with healthcare costs as they get older and they have issues?
Well, you know, that's a good question. And I'm glad that we have an opportunity to talk about it a little bit more because it is critical. Because it is amazing how many, the percentage of seniors now in the country. And I think put it in two broad baskets, because this is a big conversation, but in two broad baskets, and we can go into some detail in another time. First and foremost, what the government has to do is, if they keep talking about making healthcare affordable for all, we really need to do something about it. There's an acute lack of oversight and regulation of health services in Bermuda, and fewer dollars are chasing these services, and anybody can open up any type of health facility they want, and people will rush to it and expect their insurance to pay for it. So we have to have a little bit better oversight of our services here because the costs keep rising. And secondly is the PLP have to stop talking about the amount of people in Bermuda and do something about it, because fewer and fewer people paying into the pool is going to make for an alarming increases in cost of health care. And one of the things that I find interesting through this budget cycle is there were no typical health legislation tabled to deal with any increases to premiums that people might pay. So I'm wondering if government is behind the 8 ball in this, and they're going to come late in the year and people will be shocked by it because it's a serious issue. So they need to address the oversight, regulation, and affordability, and they need to stop talking about getting people into Bermuda and need to do it, because when all of those people here, they pay into it. And if we continue to have these challenges in healthcare, a lot of companies can insure outside of Bermuda. Certainly international business can. So if they're not comfortable with what's going on here, or our premiums get up too much, they can take their insurance means in other places. And then that will be another kicker to us that's not acceptable.
Okay. Earlier, you mentioned in relation to healthcare, you mentioned about road safety and how that's adding to it. What do you think can be done and should be done to help make our roads safer?
Well, it's a great question, and I'm glad that the Minister of National Security has mentioned it. Unfortunately, I only had about 15 minutes to speak during a 5-hour debate on national security, and at the time, the minister didn't mention road safety. I took some of my 15 minutes of time to mention it because, Don, I don't think anyone will disagree with us in this conversation. And every time you venture onto the road, you are shocked by some of the very, very bad behavior. I see it all the time, and I'm just blown away by the speed, and I'm blown away by the lack of care and the absolute recklessness that drivers might take. And, I see the minister was probably talking a bit off the cuff, and, it does impact all of us, and some people even more, because of the challenges they face. But, putting yellow lines on the road, as the minister suggested, even temporary, it doesn't do the trick. What we need to do is, first and foremost, if we're serious about road safety, we need to make sure the police have the resources to have a road traffic unit on the road at all times. One of the reasons why people are reckless and careless and travel at high rates of speed is because they know, in all likelihood, they're never going to come across a police officer, ever going to come across a police officer. And so you abuse that on purpose. But it's just disgusting that we've gotten to that point where people say it's a culture. So we need to make sure that the road traffic unit has the resources to be out there, because in my view, as a former minister, and I understand the workings of all the departments in the ministry, I think, quite well. It is my view that there's a lack of I guess, presence by the police on the roads because they're stuck in other duties. And one of them could be the significant number of serious accidents and fatalities that they have to investigate. That means if they're not out on the road, they're doing the investigations. We have the lack of enforcement. And so I know the police are about 60 understaffed at the present time. Operation Vega is good. You get out there and a whole pile of tickets are given out, but that's only one blip through 12 months, or one blip every quarter or something like that. The police need to be out there every day. They're not seen out there, and people take advantage of it. And then the government needs to actually make something happen with CCTV cameras. It was in the budget last year, Don. It's still in the budget this year because they haven't progressed it forward yet. They can help drastically by having speed cameras cameras at different junctions. And we need to also take a look at penalties for breaking the law when you're on the road. It's $50 for running a stop sign. That's ridiculous. It's $100 for driving without a license. Anybody's going to take that risk if they don't care about the rules of the road. And I don't want people to say, well, Michael Dunkley's just going to, throw the book at people. We do have a national crisis. I support the minister. It's disgusting that we've let it go so far. So unfortunately, some people are going to be upset because we've got to calm things down. And we've got to make our roads safe again, because it is impacting our way of life, and our visitors don't like it as well. So those are just a few suggestions there that I think important.
I know, like the speed cameras issue, like in other places, they have the cameras and you go by, they take the license plate or the picture, they send you the ticket, and then you go to court to pay it. You don't actually appear before a judge. You pay what the fine is. Would there need to be revamping in our system where you don't appear in traffic court for your ticket, you just go pay for it, or you could pay it online?
I think that's perfect sense. And a lot of people don't pay their tickets now because they think it's highly unlikely that they're ever going to get caught. But what happens when you get these blitzes, then, people are stopped. Oh, sorry, Mr. Dunkley. We're just doing a check, but we checked in the book and you've got 2 outstanding tickets from 5 years ago. So we're going to have to take you in overnight until you settle those in the morning. And people try to get away with it. Or what they also do when people are stopped, they give a wrong name. I've known that a number of times, and it's ridiculous. The other thing, Don, that we should do is we need to change the rules and the legislation around drink driving. Because I think it's ridiculous that the police have to go to a magistrate to get permission to do it. And then they have to advertise when and where they're going to set up the checks. It's absolutely crazy. The last I checked, no one told you when they're going to jump on a bike or go jump in a car when they're drunk. We need to give the police the ability to stop and check people, because drinking and driving is a menace on these roads, and it's taken lives and it's ruined people's lives. I don't think anywhere else in the world do this. And I've heard the conversation about, constitutional rights and stuff like that. Yeah, but you and me and everyone else listening to this have a constitutional right to go on the road and believe they're going to be safe, not for some drunk to come around the corner. And I'm tired of these excuses by people. Well, there should be more taxis available. I'm sorry, people, brothers and sisters, I'm sorry. If you're going to go out at night and you think you might want to have a good time and drink too much, have a designated driver, somebody that's in your group that can't drink, or arrange for a taxi to pick you up at a certain time. We're adults, children. We should think like adults and make it happen. And we need to change the legislation to give the police the ability to do what they have to do. Don't tell people when you're setting up drunk driving checks. It's just ridiculous. And the last point I'll make on that is, with all those constitutional people who hide behind that, I say, well, but wait a second. The PLP introduced Section 315F, which allows the police at any time to stop people if they think there might be challenges with gangs or guns or drugs or anything like that. So why do you give up in one area but take away in another? Drunk driving, drink driving is a tremendous challenge in Bermuda, and not just at night times, all through the day. People stop in their favorite store and pick up a beer. It's disgusting, and we need to do better about that.
Now, earlier you mentioned with the police about them being 60 short, or I think that's what you said.
Correct.
But isn't for all the services, aren't they all short? I know my brother-in-law is in the prison service, and he's always complaining that they don't have enough officers. And we've seen the recruitments for the fire service being heavily promoted over the last couple of months.
Right. And just before I go there, one other thing that I think is important as well, because I mentioned violence. The minister spent a big deal of time on his brief talking about the gang violence reduction program. And we're all for that. But the challenge with the gang violence reduction program is they never stick to the budget. It continues to go over budget by at least 30% the last 2 years. They budgeted more than 50% this year than last year. The budget will be, get this, Don, $946,000 this year, when 2 years ago it was $379,000. And so with all of that money being spent, I asked the minister, tell us how you view it as a success, and break down the programs you're running, the cost of those programs against the amount you're paying in payroll, because they're keen to put a lot of money into gang violence reduction programs, which we support with control, but they're not keen to fund the police in road safety and certain areas like that. And that's another important thing. Now, back to the recruitment. During the minister's long presentation, through every part of the national security, whether it be the Bermuda Police Service, whether it be Customs, whether it be Corrections, whether it be the Regiment, whether it be the Bermuda Fire Rescue Service, every single one of those departments, who I have the utmost respect for, is short-staffed. And I was adding up the numbers as the minister went through, and the police are not going to get 60 more this year, even though they're short. So what that's going to mean is, with a staff of 360, they're still going to have more attrition because of retirements. A lot of people coming to 55, or just natural attrition. So they'll still be short. But all of these other areas, I added up the numbers, and the minister said, if you add up all the numbers, it was between 85 and 100 people that were going to be recruited for national security departments through the year. Don, I tell you right now, as I said in Parliament, it's not going to happen. For a number of reasons. One is government hiring is way too slow. I remember that when I was a minister, because corrections would lose psychiatrists because they couldn't get them through the process fast enough, and they're gone somewhere else where they can get a job in a period of time. So one, government hiring is too slow. And two, all the services, and this is critically important, all the services are pulling from the same pool. And we know that you start out with 250 people applying, and then as you whittled all the way down through everything that has to be done, the tests and everything like that, you get 6 or 7. And so when they re-advertise again, you get the same people, or they go to corrections, or they go to the fire service. So what's going to happen now, because government instituted austerity measures over the past couple of years, and that's their wording in budgets, austerity measures. Now we're trying to play catch up. We're behind the 8 ball, and it's just not going to happen. So safety and security potentially could struggle on this island. But what will happen, Dawn, is the taxpayer will pay more in overtime because of that. So if the police don't have enough people, they ask people to work overtime. And the same with corrections, the same with the fire service. And, government's dropped the ball. And in my view, respectfully, government dropped the ball with the airport fire services and the number of people were required. They took too long to action. Then they had to bring in people, qualified professionals from Canada, and gave them a better deal in all intents and purposes, say many people, than Bermudians would get. And that's just not acceptable. And so we need to do better than that. And I hope this minister stays around for a couple of years, Don, because we've had 3 ministers in 3 years. You don't, in a ministry like national security, you need stability and you need somebody who understands what's going on there to work to help those services.
Now, our half hour is up plus sub, but I want to give you an opportunity to say anything that I haven't asked you that's on my list here that I didn't get a chance to get to because all these issues are very important that you want to emphasize before we sign off tonight.
No, what I will say is I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. You obviously always come very well prepared, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. What I will say in regards to this, in the health debate and in the short time that I had in national security, sometimes people think that perhaps it's too critical. But what I'm trying to do is bring recognition to challenges that we face. And I'll give government credit where credit is due. And, if we focus in on some of the things that I talked about tonight, to get to the bottom of road safety, to get with recruitment, to deal with hospital finances, I think we'll be better overall next year. And I hope government listens, because in spite of what government members think, the 30 do need the 6. We're all in this together, and we swim strongly together, or we're going to tread water and drown as individuals, and we do not want to do this. My colleagues and I serve because we care. We serve to try to make a difference, and we'll continue to do our best. So the government has to get used to constructive criticism, which is what I always try to offer. So thank you, and I appreciate your time, and I just say stay healthy.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Dunkley, Shadow Minister for National Security and Health and Seniors. We appreciate your time this evening. I've been your host, Don Burgess, and as always for Bird News, I wish you a beautiful evening.
Thank you.